Have any choice talking about shine.
Okay, welcome to the Lovecraft Easing podcast, where we do not pose nude with our books and send them out. Uh, my guest today is Alan Baxter. Hey, man.
Hey, how are you?
Good. For those who are listening and not watching later, you're missing out because he's got a great background. So, yeah.
My wife calls the cave. This is where I spend a lot of time.
Is it a basement?
No, it's effectively it's a study office, but it's also the spare room, so stuff gets shifted and a bed gets folded out if we have guests, and yeah, otherwise it's my cave.
I got really lucky a few months ago. My wife got um, she received a lot of some teacher benefits, in other words, money. So we
Mm.
were able to move to an actual house and in a better town, not too far away. But she finds this thing online, right? And she's like, here's a house for rent. And Mike, it's got a really huge shed that's finished, has heat, AC, you know,
Mm.
everything.
Nice.
And I'm like, that sounds wonderful. And that sort of thing never happens, never comes to fruition. So I didn't get my hopes up at all. Well, I'm sitting in it now. So, yeah.
Nice.
So
Can't argue with
I
that.
finally have a bat cave, but I call it the book house.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
book
that's
house.
the dream. That's the dream one day.
Yeah. I mean,
But one day
it's
it'd
a,
be nice for this to be just an actual spare room and to have a shed or a something.
well, to be honest, I'm okay as long as I have my own space, even if it's a bedroom or,
Yeah,
a place
as
where I
long as you
can
can shut the
close,
door, right?
right, as long as you can shut the door. But
Wow,
this is really cool. I can blare my music and I can yell at guests without anyone hearing in the house.
nice. That's the
It's
way.
it's a separate unit, but it's about 3 feet away from the house, so it's really close.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about me. Uh, so yeah, you know what? I think anybody listening to this is probably familiar with who you are and the type of fiction that you write, but for those who don't, let's start there with you. So,
Okay. Sure. So, I'm mostly a horror writer. I've always been a huge fan of Clive Barker, who's been probably the biggest influence on me. And there's that kind of fantasy, fantastic, supernatural element to everything that I do. But although I was born and raised in the UK, I've lived about half my life now in Australia, and most of my more recent horror is also set in Australia. My latest book, Sallow Bend, is sort of small town folk horror that's sort of set kind of small town anywhere. It's a little bit non-specific,
yeah.
but otherwise, I've got books like The Gulp and The Fall and things like that that are very much very Australian settings. So yeah, so I've been called the Lord of Weird Australia and things like that in the past. So that's kind of what I do. That sort of dark horror, weird,
Well,
fantastical, often
well, that
Australian.
that's kind of nice though.
Yeah, yeah, I don't mind it. I'm quite happy with that. That's Australia's Master of Literary Darkness and the Lord of Weird Australia are two things people have said about me that tend to tend to get quoted on a lot of promo. It's like I'll take that. You always take what other people say
Yeah,
because it's difficult to figure out what to say about yourself.
yeah. Um, I'm pulling up. Uh, for those who don't know, we thought we were doing this a little. I thought we were doing this a little later, but daylight savings time kind of screwed us, and
Yeah,
so we're a little early. So any lack of preparation on my part, I will blame on daylight savings time, which,
that's fair. That's fair.
God, no.
I mean, it's early Sunday morning here, so I've got that excuse as well. I've only just finished my first coffee, so
Yeah, I was gonna taunt you and get a beer, but I'll wait till
that,
after the.
I'd get in trouble with my wife. I'd be tempted to get one and join you.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a Zoom thing here and share screen and see if that works. You see that, Alan?
Oh, yeah, I do. That would be from my website.
Yes, it is. It's from your website. I'm not sure if the words are in the way here, but A Reader's Guide to Alan Baxter, horror, contemporary dark fantasy, supernatural crime noir, action adventure. And, you know, if you go to Alan's website, folks, alanbaxter.com.au, then you can find this. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Stop share. I've got an alarm going off. Oh, it's my alarm to remind me to
It's
talk to
nearly time for the
you.
podcast.
Hey, Google, stop alarm. Okay, there we go. Anyway, you can look at this. Thank you, Google. Stop talking. Anyway, if you go there, this is right on the main page, I believe.
Yeah, it's on the homepage. It's also on the sort of my books page, so you can find it easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Alan's got standalone, very nice, huge image of his books organized, standalone novels, The Balance, Alex Kane, Eli Carver, Tales from the Gulp, and then short story collections, and so on and so forth. And so let's start there. Let's talk about the Gulp first.
Sure.
And then the Leaves Forget too. Thanks for sending me a copy of that, by the way.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, that's yeah, that well, okay, so excuse me, we have to go back a little bit to so the Gulp originally became a pandemic project.
Yeah.
Because right in when was the pandemic? 2020. So 2019, I released The Rue, which is just a crazy gonzo B-movie horror novella about a killer kangaroo that decimates an outback town. And it was a bit of a joke. It was a gag. Keelan Patrick Burke ended up mocking up a cover for this ridiculous idea of a demonic kangaroo, and then I got hassled into writing the actual story. So for fun, I did, and I wrote this sort of schlocky horror novella. And I figured there's no point in trying to search for a publisher or anything like that. So I self-published it. Just for fun.
I love the
basically.
tagline. See you outback.
Yeah, that's it. That was Keelan. That was Keelan.
Oh,
Put
was
that
it?
on the cover. Yeah. That was from the original when he mocked up a cover. So yeah, when people hassled me about writing the book, I ended up buying the cover from Keelan, and I wrote the book, and I self-published it just for fun.
Yeah.
And it actually went really well. It was really popular. And I, like I've said many times, if all my books sold as well as that one did, I would be a lot better off than I am now.
There's a lesson there somewhere, isn't there? Just
Well, exactly. I mean, partly about having fun, I think. But the other thing that it taught me was that people were really keen for very Australian stories, because the previous books, like for example, the Alex Kane series is a trilogy, sort of dark urban fantasy, urban horror trilogy. The protagonist is Australia, and it starts in Australia, but it's kind of international, travels all over the world and to other worlds and whatnot. So I would always include Australian stuff. My novel Devouring Dark, one of the protagonists is Australian, but it's set in London. It's a kind of crime noir, gangster, corrupt cops and supernatural assassins novel. But then after The Rue went as well as it did, that got me thinking, oh, maybe I should just lean into Australian stories a bit more. And then the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, there was homeschool for my kid. People were in lockdown. I was I teach martial arts as my sort of day job. And I had to transition that to Zoom classes and everything else like that. So I just didn't have anything like the brain space available to concentrate on novels.
Yeah.
And so I just went, oh, fuck it. I'm going to write these stories that I've had in mind for ages that were longer than short stories, but they were sort of novellas in length and idea. And the idea was that I would have this weird, creepy Australian harbour town called Gulpepper, but locals call it the Gulp because the place has a habit of swallowing people. And I'd never written these stories. It was sort of, as one reviewer put it, Baxter's found his Castle Rock, which was, I was really happy when someone said that, because that was kind of the vibe. I wanted to create this kind of fictional Australian geography that I could revisit and set lots of stories in. And I'd never done it because I figured it was going to be so Australian. But then after The Rue did as well as it did, I just, during the pandemic, when I had some much reduced writing time available, I would sit and work on these stories. And I ended up writing 5 novellas, and I put them together in a collection and put it out. And normally I work with publishers wherever I can, because I don't like the process of what's involved in publishing. I want to focus on the writing. But after the Rue did okay, and in the middle of the pandemic and everything else, I self-published the Gulp as well, and that did really
The
well. And I
the
immediately,
stigma is I think long gone for the most part. It's a very legitimate
absolutely,
thing to do,
it
you know.
certainly is, and it really comes down to whether or not you can be bothered to do that side of things, because the
Well, and I
main
would say also, it comes down to if you're going to self-publish, you really have to make sure, speaking of that side of things, that you don't have some half-ass cover, that it's been edited properly,
mm,
you
mm.
know, that sort of thing.
That's
Sorry to
absolutely
interrupt.
right.
Yeah.
No, no, but you're quite right. And I did that. I've found someone who I use for independent editing. If I do anything that I put out myself, I can do cover design in terms of layout, typography, but I'm no artist, so I buy art. Or in the case of the Gulp and the Fall, my wife, who's a professional artist, was kind enough to let me use a couple of her paintings for the covers, which really suit the vibe. So yeah, so I put
What
out
did
the
you have to
Gulp, and
do for
then
that?
oh,
The
25
dishes
years of
for like
marriage.
the
Yeah.
dishes for like 6 months?
Yeah, I'm still paying it off. But yeah, so then that was five novellas, and it was really popular, and people were talking a lot about it, and I was really pleased to see the response to it. So I wrote another five and put out a book called The Fall. So those 10 stories make up those two books are basically the initial tales from the Gulp. And it's a bit like a mosaic novel across 10 stories across two books. So all 10 stories stand on their own. You could read any one of them on its own, and it's just a story set in or around this weird, creepy harbor town. But across both books, there's a bigger sort of arc that takes place. And now I
I've
plan
always
to,
enjoyed that, and I think most readers do as well.
yeah. Well, and that's the appeal of things like King's Castle Rock and stuff. And we're readers, but we're all nerds at heart. And when you spot, that's so and so from that thing, or
Right,
that shop, but you get that little thrill when you spot those Easter eggs. And so,
right.
the Gulp and the Fall are just packed with them. And now since that, I've been using that. So I've got a new novel coming out in May called Blood Covenant. And that's set some distance from Culpeper, but it's in the same geography, and the Gulp gets a mention. And the novel that I'm working on now is set in Moncton, which is the town one south of Culpeper. So I've kind of
Um,
got this
why?
geography where there's, sorry, go on.
I'm sorry. Please go on.
I was
You
just saying
got
I've got this geography where I've said there's sort of the city of Endon, and there's a highway that goes straight down to the city of Moncton, and that's where most people go. But there's a
mhm.
turn off that's not even on most maps. That if you take a left, it takes you to the harbour town of Culpeper. So that sort of generalised area somewhere on the south coast of New South Wales in Australia. That's this sort of fictional bit of geography that I've created and dropped in, and so now I'm using it to set all kinds of sort of stories and books, and sometimes they're directly interacting. Sometimes it's just a passing mention, and people could be like, "Oh, that's so and so," and then the rest of
Yeah.
it's entirely on its own. Yeah.
You must have felt for some reason that this story needed a different location than the Gulp.
Yeah. So, like for example, with Blood Covenant, that's the basic premise of that novel is that there's a gang of sort of rough like criminal element from Sydney. They come down, take a drive several hours down into the country to rob a bank because they think it'll be easy to rob a bank in the country. It'll be an easy job, and it goes really badly wrong, and suddenly they're on the run, and so they just bolt off away from this town, and they head into the bush, and they going up this road just trying to get away, and they see a sign for a hotel that doesn't open for another month. And they're like, oh, that's a great place to hide out. But when they get there, the family who run the hotel have actually just arrived, setting it up ready for the start of the season. And so suddenly they take the family hostage. But then that turns out to be the least of their problems, because in the hostage taking, blood gets spilled, and something out in the bush notices the blood, and
That's a great
shenanigans
setup.
ensue. Yeah. So the idea of the bank and the isolated hotel and everything, that was the sort of seed of the story. And then it was a case of, well, you know what? Why don't I just set it in this geography, because it works. So basically the bank they tried to rob was in the town of Endon, and so the book opens with them barreling out of Endon up into the hills, where they come across this sort of remote lodge. So, and that's it. That's as much of a mention as it gets. But for people who know my other books, they'll be like, oh, that's Endon. That's near Culpeper. So you
Yeah.
get that kind of hint. And otherwise, the book stands entirely alone. And if you hadn't read The Gulp or The Fall, it would just be irrelevant. They would just be names of places.
What when does that one come out?
That's May. That's coming out the end of May with Cemetery Dance. They produced. Oh, you can just see it over my shoulder. That Sallow Bend
Mm.
was at the end of what year? So that was the end of 22. And May this year, the next one with Cemetery Dance comes out called Blood Covenant. That's the one. That's the one I was just talking about.
So, yeah, if you're speaking to the audience, which you are all horror readers, I'm assuming, because you're listening to us. I don't know what it is about small town horror, that setting, that trope, but it's just so appealing, you know. And what do you think it is?
It, it's a
The
difficult
small
thing to put
town
your
secrets and all that under the
Yeah, well,
surface.
it's interesting because I've written another book called The Past is a Dark Country that is currently sort of on submission, looking for a home that I deliberately set in a city. It's Australian, it's set in the city of Wollongong, but I deliberately set it in a city because I've been doing so much small town stuff lately, and I didn't want to just be the small town horror guy.
Right,
But what was interesting, so I think a lot of the sort of the core values of horror come in terms of um, apart from any supernatural stuff that might be going on, these concepts of being trapped somewhere or being isolated or everybody knowing your business and all that sort of stuff, all that sort of really feeds well into story. And so when you've got something that's really contained in small towns, you have, as soon as you get to a small town, it has that vibe. Like a big city is a big bustling kind of an organism and things happen within it.
right,
Whereas you get to a small town and things happen in the small town, but the small town itself is also sort of aware of them, like nothing, the town and everybody in it is isolated, but nothing in it happens in isolation
right,
because of that sort of, yeah, that lack of anonymity. Whereas a city, you also, something could be happening in the apartment next door and you would have no idea because half the time people don't even talk to their neighbors. Whereas in a small town, you know everyone across town, across street, down this farm and that guy, and yeah.
and there's this network, even if it's not spoken, it's not out there, but the gossip circle, everybody knows what's going on, or most people know what's going on.
Yeah. And then you find people that you don't even really know in town. You might have seen them or something else, and suddenly, but you're aware of the fact that they probably know your business. Like if
Yeah,
something's been going on, they're probably aware of it, even peripherally, and they're like, "Oh, you're that guy. You're the so and so." And I mean, I live in a small town as well. I live in a village of just less than 1,000 people on the coast, and I'm surrounded by other small towns. And I've had things before where I've been talking to someone and someone's there I don't know, like at school pickup or something like that. And there'll be a conversation and someone will go, "Oh, by the way, this is Alan." And the other person will be like, "Oh, you're that kangaroo horror guy," or something like that. Like, people sort of are peripherally aware of what you
right,
do. So I don't know who you are, but yeah. So
right.
it's
A
a sort of the
thousand or
blessing
less,
and the
that is
curse.
a small town.
I think it might be more than 1,000 now. Last census, it was 942. But there has been some new development, so it's probably double that by now. But it's pretty small.
You mentioned the apartment next door not knowing your business, or you know, it makes me think of, and I read it as a kid, and I wish I could find it, in one of those old sci-fi, 70s
Mm.
sci-fi short stories, um, Clifford D. Simic and others later than him. But the analogy was they were trying to explain, I think, um, you know, traveling a great distance, but um, I don't know what they were trying to explain. But the analogy they used was this couple in this apartment in New York City, and you know how buildings, I guess, can butt up next to each other all the time
Mm.
there. Um, they were friends with the people in the apartment that they not shared the wall with, but their wall butted up to their wall.
Yeah.
And it talked about how even though they were physically within a few feet, they had to go all the way down the stairs or the elevator and then go all the way up this building, and the building entrance next door for some reason faced another way, so it was
You
yeah,
have to walk around a block to get within sort of a meter of someone.
right.
Yeah,
within a
yeah.
few feet of someone that you're, yeah,
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Like
yeah.
this is like I said, I set a novel in the city purely because I'd done so much stuff in a small town before. This this new book could have been set in a small town if I'd have wanted to stick to that vibe, but I deliberately wanted to mix it up. And so it was quite interesting to set it in a city because I lived in Sydney, one of the biggest cities in Australia. I lived in Sydney for more than a decade. Um, and I really enjoy city life, but it turns out I like to live in the country and visit the city, not the other way around.
Hmm.
But it was really interesting to set a novel in the city and get back into that vibe where people travel around from suburb to suburb sort of pretty easily, and everything you need is there, and there's a big town center and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it was quite good fun to write in that environment, having written a bunch of small town stuff for the last few years previously.
Maybe this isn't a fair question because I really don't know how familiar you are with US, but um, well, first of all, how old were you when you moved from the UK to Australia?
It's a slightly difficult question. I was basically mid-20s. I
Hmm.
left the UK and was traveling just with a backpack and a guitar for like 2 years.
Hmm.
And I ended up in Australia and I was here for almost a year. And then I continued traveling for another year. I met my wife while I was in Australia and she traveled with me. Then we were back in the UK for a year. So it's a big sort of period of time where I was traveling around. But we got married and I moved back to Australia as a permanent resident in 1999. So coming on 24 years,
Well,
25 years now that I've been here as a permanent resident, but I was in and out a lot before that.
uh, well, that's a long time. And to my ears, you have an Australian accent, not an English one.
To my English friends, I do as well.
Yeah.
To
Okay.
my Australian friends, I sound English apparently.
Well, I want to come back to you uh, traveling around with your guitar for a couple of years because that's interesting. I want to hear about that. But back to what I was wondering was a fair question was could you compare, talking about the gulp again,
Mm.
could you compare small town in Australia, small towns in America, small towns in the UK? Are they mostly similar or there are some stark differences? I mean, I realize people are always
Mm.
people, but
Yeah.
um,
It, I mean, both really.
yeah,
It's because small towns have that shared, like we talked about before, of that kind of sort of that isolation and that awareness of everybody's business, that idea that if you need something particular, you might have to travel out to the bigger city. If if you want to, you buy furniture or you need a new fridge or that sort of stuff. Sometimes, you have to travel a ways to get to the big department stores and that sort of thing. So small towns across the world kind of share that vibe. But equally, the cultural nature of people anywhere has a strong effect on those things. So people are people wherever you go. The more you travel, the more you realize how similar people are. I'm not the most traveled person, but I've been to 40 something countries and spent a lot of time in sort of
you're not the
Southeast
most
Asia.
well-traveled person, but you've been to 40 countries. I think you're doing pretty well.
No, yeah, probably not too bad compared to a lot, but I'm also sort of aware of how many places I haven't been to. But one thing, I have realized that wherever you go, people are people. I think it's one of the most important things we can do for our young people. Two things above all else, whatever schooling or anything else they have, you try and give them a love of reading so that they enjoy books and they can see themselves reflected in fiction and non-fiction and they can learn. And the other thing is to travel with them as widely as you're able to do, because the more you travel the world, the more sort of empathy you have for people in general. When you realize, you could be in Thailand or Hawaii or Germany or Australia or wherever, and you realize that people are so similar. People laugh about the same sort of things. People have the same kind of fears and trials and tribulations and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
The more you travel, the more you realize how similar people are, but also the more you recognize how culturally varied people are. And that comes back to the question you asked, that, like a small town where you are or where I am or in England or whatever, have got so many similarities at their sort of core level, but at a cultural level, the people they're all people, but they are English people or American people or Australian people. And there's a very distinct sort of cultural vibe to that sort of stuff. And it's that combination of people all being people, but people also being about where they're from. I find it just endlessly fascinating. It's kind of a delicious thing to explore in story, is that sort of cultural vibe that people carry. And interestingly, like
Yeah.
Australia, somebody once described Australia as the bastard love child of England and America, which it kind of is in a way, because it's, mostly originally colonized by Europeans, but especially English. It's still part of the Commonwealth and all that sort of archaic framework.
Right.
But Australians have got a real hunger for American movies and stuff like that. So um, there's a
More
very
than the
distinct
English, you would
American.
say?
Yeah, almost because they were like, no, screw the English. Like, even though most of them
Mm.
are descendants of English colonizers, they
Well,
want to sort
and
of
and
cast that.
also cast-offs. Well, it would,
Well, yeah,
send
or
your
the
prisoners
descendants
there.
of prisoners. That's right.
Yeah.
But they want. I think there was almost this kind of thing like, no, we don't want to be associated with the British. We don't
Right.
want to be. We don't want that. We want to be ourselves. And in by doing that, they've kind of ended up embracing more of of American culture than British culture, and it's ended up being this weird combination mix of all of them, which I find quite fascinating. And having grown up in the UK and traveled a lot, and then lived here half my life, I think anyone who's an immigrant to a country gets to see that you kind of recognize more about how, when you grow up in something, you
Yeah.
don't sort of recognize the influence so much. Whereas when you're from the outside, you can spot certain influences on things. I think the immigrant's experience of a country is quite unique in that respect, because we see it from the outside. Like
Yeah.
I'm it's like you mentioned my accents. Like I get to a point now where I'm always an outsider. Like if I go to England, people say I sound Australian. When I'm in Australia, people say I sound English. There's nowhere that I don't have an accent. I grew up and born in the UK. I've been an Australian citizen for nearly 25 years, but so I'm both British and Australian. But I don't.
Yeah.
There's not a single thing that fixes as a focus anymore, which gives us quite a unique perspective on things, which I often sort of try to draw on. I think it informs. I think I don't know how true it is, but I always feel like I can tell when I'm reading books and stories. I always feel like I can tell an immigrant writer and
Mm.
someone
That's
who's
interesting.
yeah, someone who's Australian and writing stories set in Australia, but they weren't born in Australia.
Hmm.
It's almost like you can kind of tell that there's a certain vibe or a certain style to the way they write about the place, and it's like, I bet you weren't born here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've spotted it a few times. It took a few times before I realized I was noticing it.
Uh, I heard an English actor say a couple years ago, and he was speaking very generally, of course, but he said that it seemed to him that the American people like to watch people that are famous or rich or super skilled, like a spy movie, that kind of thing, on TV or whatnot. And English people want to watch things about their particular, the people in their circle or
Mm.
their wealth status and so forth. I thought that was interesting. I don't know how true it is because,
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, there is definitely the American, sorry, mindset that America very much has this, you can be who you like, anyone can grow up to be president. And there's this kind of this real aspirational kind of
right.
mindset in America, whereas, you know, British people in particular can be a lot more sort of staid in their attitudes. And it's not so much the case now, but when I was a kid, you would have people who would born, grow up, marry, grow old, and die without traveling more than 50 miles from their home. My dad's cousin, when my dad died, his cousin, a lot of my family are on that side are in the West Country in Devon and Cornwall.
Yeah.
And when my dad was close to dying and was in the hospice, and people were coming to visit, a lot of people were coming to say their goodbyes. His cousin came to visit, and it's about a 3 hour drive from where they live to sort of southwest of London, where we were. And this was my dad's cousin in her sort of mid 60s, and that drive to see my dad in the hospice was the furthest she'd ever been in her life. And it's like, if you can live more than 60 years somewhere and never travel more than 3 hours in a car, like, she's never been out of the country. She's never, yeah, it's just
Samwise
th-
Gamgee. If I take one more step, I'll be
That's
further
just
from home
understand.
than I've ever been.
That's it. That's it. It's a bit like that. And there's, I always make a joke because Australia is just so massive. I frequently drive between Sydney and Melbourne, which is a tiny corner on the big map of Australia, but it's like a 9-10 hour drive. But that's I don't think twice about that. British people, if they have to drive for more than 20 minutes, they pack sandwiches on a thermos. It's like it's just this concept is just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of driving here.
Yeah,
Um,
that's it. You guys share like we do. Like you don't,
yeah,
if you have to travel somewhere and you drive 5 hours, it's like, well, that's what you do. You don't think about it, it's just normal.
yeah. I grew up uh, in Iowa for the most part, but every summer for a couple of weeks, we'd drive down to Fort Worth, where I was born, Texas, and 12 hours. And we did it so much that a 12-hour drive is nothing to me,
Yeah.
you know.
We were unusual when I was growing up. 'Cause like I said, my a lot of my dad's cousins and people were down in Devon and Cornwall. And every summer we would go down to Devon. And back in those days, there were the motorways. There weren't nearly as many motorways as there are. When I was a kid, used to be about a 4.5 hour drive from our place down to my great aunt and uncle, where we would always stay when we went down to visit. And every summer we did that, and that was pretty normal for us. But everybody would always sort of laugh and joke about how we drive for hours and hours all the time, and how weird we are. And oh, they drive. We were 50 miles from London, but they're like, oh, they drive from up London and they come down here and they come every summer and they drive for hours. And it's like, it was so normal to us to do it. But yeah,
Weird's another word for you're not like me, right?
yeah, that's it.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Well, talk about your travels when you were younger, and you said you traveled for a couple of years. What brought that on, and where did you go, and what did you do?
Mm.
I mean, I know we're talking about your horror writing, but
Oh, it all
folks,
fit. It's
he's got
where
a
it all
lot of
comes from.
yeah, this is grist for the
Yeah.
mill, right?
That's it, most definitely. Um, I've always been I've always been someone who's had something of a wanderlust. Like even when I was, like I said, even from being a little kid, we would drive to the West Country every summer. That became normal. It wasn't unusual for me to hop on the motorbike and ride from where I live, not far from London, to Scotland, which is a sort of 9 or 10 hour ride on the bike because I used to love the Western Highlands and I would spend a lot of time up there. Being in the UK, you can go a couple of hours from where I was down to Dover, and you get a ferry across to Calais in France, and then you've got the entire European continent. And I would do that frequently on the motorbike as well, just sort of ride around the place. And I think my record was 5 countries in one day just by riding across borders and aiming for borders to see how many countries you could ride through in a single day, things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
America is so big that a lot of times Americans don't think about it, that same amount of space is several
yeah,
countries
yeah,
at
that
the
it
very
is.
least
I
in
mean,
Europe.
at least, exactly. Like if you took Australia as an example as well, if you took Australia and you overlaid it on Europe, Perth in Western Australia would be on Dublin, and Sydney and Eastern Australia would be on Moscow. So it's like the entirety of the European continent, which is,
Yeah,
dozens of countries, would all fit inside Australia.
yeah,
So those kind of distances
absolutely.
they're kind of a bit mind blowing like that.
So
But I would do
so
that.
you're riding all over Europe.
Yeah, I would do that. I would ride all over the place and we would go to motorcycle rallies I mean, it wasn't traveling in Europe is this different sort of mindset as well, because, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, we wouldn't think twice about dropping 50 quid on a cheap flight, London to Berlin, and we'd go to a party in Berlin. So we'd
Hmm.
fly in on Saturday morning, we'd party all night and be dragged, we'd fly back on Sunday and go to work on Monday. So traveling around like that has always been part of sort of who I am. And I always wanted to travel further. And right into my sort of early mid 20s, I'd been around a lot of the place. I lived a few months in Spain at one point, but I'd never been outside of Europe.
Hmm.
But when I was in my early teens, a friend of mine who was born and raised near Sydney in Australia, his dad's work brought him out to the UK, and so for 2 or 3 years he lived in the UK, and we were in school together. We became really good friends, and then when he moved back to Australia, we kept in touch. We would write to each other the old-fashioned way, and we would also record. We would send each other tape cassettes. We would just
Tape cassettes.
the original podcasts. We would just sit there and talk shit and talk about what's going on and
Right.
post and say, hey, check out this track and record a song on there or whatever, and post the cassette. And then a couple of months later, he'd send one back to me, and we kept in touch this way. And then when I was in my early 20s, I was in a real rut. I was working a crappy office job. I'd been doing martial arts and fighting in competition a lot, and I was playing in a band, and the band wasn't really going anywhere, and I just was really getting itchy feet again. Um, and I decided to go and see my mate Dan, who was living back in Sydney by then. And so then one night with a friend of mine, we ended up talking about it, and she was like, "Oh, look, I really want to go traveling, but I'm too scared to do it on my own." And she knew Dan from back in
Yeah.
the day, and she was because he'd been over to visit one time since. Um, and she was like, instead of just going to see Dan, like, why don't we really make the most of it? And basically, we started talking about it early one evening, and by midnight, we're sitting there with a map on the table and a pencil line, and we've planned this whole round the world trip. And
Nice.
uh, and so then we started basically saving up, and I got an extra job. I was working security on a at a local pub, and I started doing extra shifts behind the bar and stuff as well. And we saved up our money, and then we kicked off to go around the world, and we sort of we went out to Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia and places like that. And then we came into Australia at Darwin in the north, and we travelled down the middle to Uluru and Alice Springs and back up and across Queensland and down the coast. And eventually I got to Sydney, and hung out with my friend there. And the friend I was traveling with, she went off and did her own thing again at that point. And I met the girl who became my wife. And then when my visa was running out, having lived in Sydney for nearly a year at that point, um, she decided to defer her university course, and she came with me, and we traveled in New Zealand and Fiji and LA and stuff, and eventually got back to London. And then we traveled around Europe. Her family's Polish, and so we sort of went and visited Poland for a few weeks as well, and came back. And eventually, as her visa started running out, we ended up getting married, because the only way to stay together, because we'd been traveling, we didn't have shared bills, we had no way to prove anything. So we got married, and I applied to move permanently to Australia. But the course of all of that stuff was more than 2 years of just, like I said, backpacking a guitar and just traveling around one country to the next and mooching around. We spent several weeks living in a car in New Zealand. We rented a station wagon, and bags would be in the back, and we'd drive around. And every night we'd throw the bags in the front seat and sleep in the back before we drove on to the next place, stuff like that.
Did you have you had a chance to see Reacher season 2 yet?
No, I haven't seen Reacher at all yet, actually.
You should. One of the
Yeah, it's
things,
on my list.
the reason why I'm bringing this up is in the opening scene to Reacher season 2. I was just trying to find it just now, but I couldn't find the exact text. But Reacher says something uh, as a voiceover. He says that his ancestor that people stayed close to the fire, you know,
Mm,
and his ancestors must have been those who didn't and wandered
yeah.
far from the fire. My We were traveling from somewhere in the late 90s, and we stopped at a convenience store, and then my wife, I went back out to the car, then my wife came back out, and she had this book that she had bought for me, and it was the first Reacher book. And
Mm,
she said, I really think you're going to like this series, because all this guy does is he's retired from the military, and he just travels all around America, you know,
yeah, just
for
wanders
for
around looking for interest.
right, for no reason at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, that I've only I've traveled all around America. To say that I'm not well traveled is an understatement, but I suppose if you overlaid America on Europe, I've traveled a lot.
This is
But
the thing, yeah, and this
yeah,
is a lot of where that sort of attitude in America comes from, because it is so big. When we
yeah,
always laugh about this, and it's you careful not to be too privileged about this sort of stuff, but it is something that comes up quite funny, because there was this guy when we were in Fiji, my wife and I, or my at that point my wife to be, um, there was an American guy there, and his mind was absolutely blown by being in Fiji. Um, and we were sort of laughing about it, going, "Oh, this is nice. This guy's never seen anything like this." And at one point, he said he was like, "It's like I've been all over the world, man. I've never seen anywhere like this." And we were like, "Oh, right. Well, where have you been?" And I can't remember which one it was, but he rattled off like 5 American states, and then was like, "But this is like nowhere I've ever been." And it's like, "Well, everywhere you just said was America. Is this the
right.
first time you've been outside of America?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, I needed a passport for this trip." And it's
Well,
like,
it can vary wide. It can vary widely in ways in America, and in some ways
yeah.
not. You know, so
Well, Australia's the same. Each state is a bit like a different country. Like if you're in the Northern Territory and you compare that to Victoria, they are climatically and everything and geographically and stuff, they are entirely different countries. They're talking about traveling across Europe. You can travel through three different countries and not really see much different. Sometimes I would know what country I was in by what currency I was charged for at the campsite or the hostel. It'd be
mm,
like, oh, guilders, I'm back in Holland. And, you wouldn't realize. Now it's the euro, so you can't even use that anymore.
right.
But yeah, but when you talk about the scale size of places like America or Australia, different states are like different countries. Like it is like traveling internationally if you travel for a few hours. So yeah, it's all about sort of perspective, and they're all just red lines drawn on a map by fucking people.
Yeah, right.
So that
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, and surrounded by water. You
yeah,
know, when you get to
yeah,
speaking of other countries. Um, all right, so the gulp. Um, talk about your short story collections. Let's go there. And no, I'm
sure.
sorry. I wanted to ask you about The Leaves Forget. That was it. That's a
Oh,
beautiful
okay, yeah.
book.
Thank you.
And how did, I know how it started, but tell the audience how it started and where it's at now.
Yeah, that's an interesting story on that one, isn't it?
Yeah,
So I have a Patreon, which this. Yeah,
which
I'm no bestseller, and any making any money at this gig is hard, and that sort of small regular income that comes from a Patreon is
I'm
really
pulling the book
useful.
out. So go
Oh,
ahead.
okay, cool, cool.
Yeah.
Um, and so I always, on the one hand, a lot of people, oh, there it is. Look, it's a
Hmm.
damn fine. This Absinthe Books,
Beautiful
who are a
book.
branch of PS Publishing, put it together.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
do
I'll get to
great
how
work,
that
don't they?
happened. They really do beautiful books.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, so on the one hand, a lot of people are quite happy to support a Patreon just because they're like, we know that writing's a tough gig and I'm happy to support you. Whereas other people have that mindset, but they also feel like they want to get something, for their support, for
sure.
their money.
Fair
And I
enough.
always,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And I always feel like I want to make sure that people do feel like they're getting value, because it's like, if you like the books that I write and you just want to throw a few dollars at me every month, fantastic. But I also want you to feel like you are getting something for that extra level of support. And so I'm always looking for things that I can do on my Patreon. So I tend to put quite a bit of exclusive short fiction on there. I sort of write short stories or flash fiction. Sometimes I'll get patrons to give me some prompts, and then a week later I'll give them a story. And I'm starting this thing now where once a year I'm going to collect all that Patreon exclusive fiction into a book that only patrons get. So it's trying to provide that extra bit for their support.
yeah.
And
That's a
on
really
that
cool
front,
idea.
yeah, and on that front, um, I was going to say last year, but it was probably the year before that it started. It was the year before. I decided I would start serializing something, and post it for only patrons to read, something exclusive for patrons. And at the end, potentially there would be a book for them. And it sort of came out of a challenge because I was in an online conversation, I can't even remember where now, where people were talking about sort of Lovecraft and the old school of horror. And they were talking about, oh, you just don't get epistolary horror anymore. It can't work anymore because nobody writes letters. There's emails, there's phones, there's social media. And to me, that's red rag to a bull. It's like, oh, you can't write epistolary horror? Okay, challenge accepted.
Yeah.
Um, and at the time, I was thinking about serializing something for patrons, and the sort of two ideas clash, and I was like, well, fuck, that's brilliant. If I start a story, at least start it epistolary, each sort of serial installment could be a letter.
Hmm.
And that was kind of the seed of the story. So basically, this guy, it's set in Tasmania. It starts in Hobart in Tasmania, which is the island state just off the south coast of Australia. Um, and this guy comes home, and his neighbor, who's been away for months and months, comes upstairs and goes, "Oh, hey," and hands him a stack of letters and said, "We've been traveling for months, and somebody's been sending you letters, but they got the address wrong and they went to the wrong apartment." And so they've just been stacking up in his letterbox. And so this guy basically gets a pile of letters, and he realizes, as soon as he sees the writing on the front, he realizes that they're all from his sister, who's been missing for the past almost a year, and the family have almost given up. They got no idea what happens, and suddenly he's got this stack of letters.
Yeah, that's a hell
That's
of a lead in. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it came from somebody going, you can't write epistolary anymore. And so this guy then's like, shit, I can't believe it. And he takes it in and he sits down and he starts reading, and letter after letter slowly spells out what happened and gives him a clue as to what she got tied up into, what she got dragged into, and where it goes. And then the letters end some weeks before sort of the present day. And so all of a sudden he's got this information, and he gets his partner and his father, and they jump in the car and they shoot off to try to find her, try to track down based on this new information that he's got. And yeah, and so I started basically posting it every sort of week or 2 weeks. I would post the next letter, and once he'd read all the letters, I would do it sort of chapter by chapter. And it came out, it's a novella. It's a sort of, I'm not sure, like 40,000 words or something, novella in its totality. And it was going to be a Patreon exclusive thing. But then, interestingly, Maria Regan, who's a wonderful person, she's her and Paul Coyne partners in the UK, and they produce amazing stuff. And she's editor for Absinthe Books, which is a division of PS Publishing in the UK that does a novella line. And she messaged me and she said, look, this is a real shot in the dark, but I tend to have a reputation for being a prolific writer. Sometimes it feels almost pejorative when people say that. But I've always said that whatever else happens, I'm just going to continually work hard. If I fail
Hell,
at this
man, all you have to
career,
do is look at this image on your homepage, and you know that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I've
that's a
always
lot
said
of books.
if I fail at this career, it won't be because I didn't work hard enough. The only thing we control is the writing, so I just keep doing it. Um, but so she contacted me and said, "This is a long shot, but we've had someone drop out of our fall lineup for novellas." And she contacted me in like, I think it was in like April or something of last year, and was like, "Is there any chance you could get me a novella by the end of June? I'm in a bit of a hole and I've got a deadline." And I was like, well, fuck, man. If I put everything else aside, maybe I could. And then I was thinking, actually, what she's asking for, the leaves forget that I'm serializing on Patreon site. This actually really fits the brief of what she's after. So I sent a message to all the patrons and I was like, hey, does anybody have any objection if instead of you guys having this exclusively, I'll finish it for you guys exclusively so you all get to see it before anybody else, but then it will be a book with absinthe. And of course, everybody's very supportive. Everybody was like, no problem at all.
Yeah,
So I sent it to Marie, and she was like, oh, I love it. This is exactly what I'm after. So it was just really fortuitous timing in that respect. Um, so I had to quickly finish it, whereas I was sort of working on it at a slightly slower rate because I was planning to serialize. But then, Marie wanted obviously the finished thing. And so then it ended up going to her, and so she had the manuscript, I think, in by May or something, and then the book itself was launched at, I think it was launched at FantasyCon in July or August in the UK. So I think it was one of the fastest book turnarounds I'd ever had because of this sort of strange situation. But then, as you saw there, they produced these beautiful hardcovers. It's got original. I had a previous novella with PS Publishing several years ago called The Book Club, which is a similar sized novella, and it's got a beautiful original art cover by Ben Baldwin. And so when Marie bought this one for Absinthe Books, we got Ben Baldwin on board again, and so he again has done just an outstanding job with the cover. And they do a beautiful hard cover with a sort of wraparound dust jacket. They just produce really beautiful books, and they also produced, there's the regular edition, and then there's 100 signed and numbered limited editions. And I don't know if any of those are left now, but I think there might be a few of those still remaining if people are keen on sort of the collector's item version. But it's basically exactly the same book. Obviously, it's just that some of them are signed and numbered and some of them aren't. But so the limited edition, there will only ever be 100 of those. And then, as far as I understand, PS Publishing can, once the limited and the regular hardcover run sell out, then they just maintain the ebook after that, which is what's happened with the book club, because the book club's sold out now.
I was going to ask because I don't see the ebook on Amazon.
I think they don't use Amazon anymore.
Hmm.
You can buy the ebook directly from pspublishing.co.uk, where you can buy the limited edition and the hardcover or the ebook. And I'm not sure if they also use any other resellers for ebooks anymore or not. They did used to do Amazon, but I think they pulled out from Amazon. So a lot
Yeah,
of publishers are finding different routes these days.
I read, I just pulled it up again, a review of it not too long ago the runalongtheshelves.net about The Leaves Forget. He said this is a novella where the storytelling is brilliantly constructed to grab us from page one and keep us on our toes and our anxiety levels high. And that's really interesting because many books, and even many good books, don't do that.
Mm. Yeah,
You
it's a
know?
nice review, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, go ahead.
I love novellas. Like all five stories in the Gulp, all five stories in the Fall are novellas. The book club was a novella. The Rue was a novella. This one, Leaves Forget. It it really is a sort of a powerful length. I love horror novels, but for me, a horror novel tends to be a bigger thing, and in some ways, a more fantastical thing. In some ways, it has more, you know, in some ways there's more to it, whereas the novella seems to be such a prime length, or novella or the short novel basically. It's such a prime length for horror because you get that sort of immediacy and impact and disquiet and unease that you find in a short story, but it's expanded out enough that you can get some really good character development and some really good world building without it being expanded out so much like a full length novel, where there tends to also be more going on. I find novellas a really sort of unique beast in that respect, and they're so well suited for horror
I
stories.
absolutely agree. Some of my favorite horror stories are novellas.
Mm.
The Sea of Ash, of course, by Scott Thomas. The
Mm.
Man in Black by Susan Hill, and that's just a couple of them. But and I think they're making the last few years bit of a the comeback
Yeah, I
in
think they
some
are.
ways.
I think there was a time where pulp novellas were really popular, mass produced. Um, and then, and a lot of the most sort of famous novels of a certain era were actually novella, even stuff like The Old Man and the Sea.
Mhm.
Like, it's a famous book. That's a novella. It's a very
Yeah,
short novel. But then production costs and shelf space and everything started getting a lot more expensive, and people would invest in wide spines for bookshop real estate and stuff like that. And novella kind of fell out of favor a bit. And then with the advent then of ebooks and stuff, where the length of a book is kind of irrelevant, people buy a story. Um, Shorter novels, and therefore sort of by association novellas, started to become popular and more common again. I think we've seen it come around like that.
yeah.
And a lot of the time, like the Gulp and the Fall are novel length books, and each one contains five novellas that are sort of interconnected. We're seeing a lot of that sort of stuff, and we're seeing novella collections come out again. Strange Weather and things like that are becoming popular. Like Peter Straub, one of Peter Straub's best books, in my opinion, is Magic Terror, which is a collection of four novellas. Isn't it just such an outstanding book? And that sort of thing is becoming quite popular. And even these ones we're talking about, at some point, I'm planning to write. So the book club is a novella that's it's sort of a cosmic horror novella, but it's kind of focused on a missing person. This guy's wife doesn't come home from a book club one night, and he sets out to try and find out what happened.
Right.
The Leaves Forget is a missing person story as well, because there's his sister that's been missing for nearly a year, and then these letters come, and he starts doing what he can to find her. So it occurred to me that at some point, what I'll probably do is write a third novella, that is also fundamentally a missing person. But so the book club is cosmic horror. The Leaves Forget is kind of occult sort of folk horror. So I'll find another sort of horror vibe, maybe I don't know, maybe a ghost story or a haunted house or something, centered around a missing person, and write a third novella, and then I can collect those three, one original and two previously published, and again it'll be a novel length book that's three novellas. So that's
That's
kind of
a
a loose
really good
plan.
idea, Alan. Seriously.
Yeah, it's a loose plan for the future if I can.
Talk
But
about the book
I've
club.
a book club, that was an interesting one. So I originally had this idea of this guy, really normal sort of suburban life. They're just ticking along. They got a little kid. They got a 3-year-old. Nothing particular is going on. Pardon me. And this woman goes to a book club every week. And one night she doesn't come home, and it gets later and it gets later, and the guy starts getting worried, and he calls one of the book club sort of members, this one sort of contact number he's got, and the guy's like, "Oh no, I don't know. She left on time. Don't know what's happened. Don't know what to tell you." And then he calls the police, and the police come, and he suddenly realizes that despite everything seeming so normal, he doesn't actually know anything about her book club. He doesn't know. who the people are. He's got this one contact number that she gave him, that turns out to be sort of useless because the guy's like, well, she just left on time. I don't know what you're talking about.
Quick
Um,
question: is it set in the modern age with cell phones?
yes, it is. And actually, that was something that I had to factor in because at one point, so basically, um, it gets more and more to the point that it becomes apparent that she's missing and they don't know what's happened. And so this guy sets out trying to find her and trying to track her down. And there's, various complications that make the police a little bit suspicious about what might be going on. And there is something where they do some triangulation with cell phones and trying to track things down. Um, and the more the guy learns about what she's been doing, the more he realizes this doesn't sound anything like a book club. What the hell was she doing, and what was his wife into that he had no idea about? And it's playing with that whole kind of, um, you know, when you think things are normal and then you realize that they actually were never normal.
Right.
Um, and this book sort of really eventually leads into this real sort of cosmic horror vibe, and it's kind of a missing persons investigation for the first probably at least half, third, maybe half of the book, and then all of a sudden it starts really taking a left turn at the lights into this weird, messed up. This nothing is normal about this kind of story. So it's kind of designed to really, um, you think you're reading basically a police procedural almost, about this missing person and tracking her down, and then it just gets weirder and weirder, and it's designed to kind of upset the expectations on that front. So I'm very proud of that book. It was a really difficult one to get right, but I think it came out really good in the end. And it's a perfect example of a story that is just perfect in novella length. If I'd have tried to make it a novel, would have got very complicated. When I started writing it, the opening scenes of it, I thought I was writing a short story. I was planning to write a short story, and then I realized, and actually, this is a lot bigger, and it came out to be a novel.
I haven't
Well,
gotten to
novella.
that one yet, but and they're two. Sounds like they're two very different books, but in one
Yeah,
way,
that
it
one's out
reminds.
of print now, unfortunately, but you can still find some copies with resellers. But the ebook is available through PS Publishing, so you can still
Yeah,
read it that way.
yeah. It reminds me just a little bit of the Croning. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
God, I love that book.
yeah,
Yeah, it has a similar, like the Croning is, I mean,
not that it's the
Lead
same
Baron
story
is,
at all, but
no, Lead Baron is just such a master of what he does, and the Croning is in some ways a much more sort of clever and complex book, or more clever and complex kind of idea. But yeah, it is in a similar vibe. If they, yeah, as a comparison, that's a fair one.
yeah, that protagonist Donald does not know his wife at all, really,
Yeah,
like he
right,
thinks he does.
exactly. That's
Yeah,
it, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That but they can still get the ebook even though it's out of print from PS
Yeah,
Publishing.
there's you can find the hardcover at some resellers. Someone messaged me just a couple of months ago, and they sent me a photo, and they were so excited that they'd managed to find one. So they still sort of they crop up every once in a while, but the ebook is still available through the pspublishing.co.uk. And at some point, as I say, I am planning to collect the book club and the Leaves Forget with a third original novella, and I don't know if we'll find a publisher that's interested in that, or maybe that will become some future self-publishing project or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah. How many of your books are on Audible?
Um,
Roughly, I mean.
so all the short story collections, and the Gulp and the Fall and those things are not.
Hmm.
But if you look on that thing on my website, if you look on the Reader's Guide graphic there, all of the novels on the top row, with the exception of Devouring Dark, are on Audible.
Okay.
So the Alex Kane series, the Balance series, Sallow Bend, Hidden City, they're all um, they're all on Audible.
Okay.
Um, uh, Devouring Dark, I've got a real soft spot for that novel, but it's set in London. It's got London gangsters. It's got a Scottish protagonist and an Australian protagonist, sort of co-protagonist in that. So it's a real tricky one to do in Audible, because it's like, well, do you just stick with, you don't want someone. Some narrators can do a good job where they differentiate voices, but you don't necessarily want to get that far where people are like really playing different roles in things. And so
Yeah.
But at some point, it would be good to find someone who could do a good job with that, with an Australian, a Scotsman, and a bunch of London gangsters. Um,
It always
so that's the
amazes
only
me people
novel
who
length
can
one.
do that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
It's
it's
quite a
quite a
talent.
skill. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look then on the bottom row, the books I've co-authored with David Wood, all of those are on Audible as well.
Okay. That's good to know. So
Mm.
there are a lot of books to talk about, but and read, folks, but I just would encourage you. I'll have the link in the show notes. Alan Baxter, TER, baxter.com.au. And Alan's got them really organized here.
Yeah,
I
well, I
want to
keep
ask,
people kept asking me like, "Oh, where should I start with your books? What's a good
right?
place to start?" And I don't really know, and so I put that
Depends on you,
graphic
right?
together.
Depends on what you're in the
Yeah,
mood for.
yeah. So I put it together like that, and I was like, "Well, look, these are standalones. This is a series. These are short stories. These are novellas, and at least it gives people sort of an angle. Like, what do you feel like? It gives
Yeah,
people a little sort of a visual to get an idea of what's going on. Yeah.
yeah. I just posted a few days ago on YouTube and on my podcast an interview with Tim Wagner. He wrote a book. There were several books, but his latest one is called "Let Me Tell You a Story." Um,
Cool.
you know
Tim's a
about
great guy.
yeah, he is about writing, but especially writing horror.
Yeah. Right.
And he had some really good things to say on the podcast. I came across the reason why I bring that up is because I came across an old video, that interview with you, how to write short stories that sell, from 7 years ago, the Creative
Oh
Pen.
yeah, that was for Joanna Penn's podcast. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Looks like it's got about 41,000 views.
Oh
So
wow, I
since
didn't
then,
know that.
yeah. Uh, I don't know if you remember the interview. I mean, like, it was 7 years ago, very much at all. But do you think your advice would be different these days in
To
writing
be honest,
short
I don't.
stories to be published?
Yeah, I don't think so, to be honest, because I'm still doing it the same way. Having said that, I tend to these days I tend to do cold submissions a lot less. Um, Partly because I've been trying to focus a bit more on writing more novels and novellas. I've also been focusing a little bit more, like I was mentioning before, with Patreon. I tend to write short fiction exclusively for patrons.
Right.
Um, that subsequently, might then get sold or collected somewhere else, or if nothing else, in a future short story collection of my own potentially. Or I'm very fortunate that I've had more than 100 short stories published over the years, and I've sort of got into a position these days where quite often people will come to me and ask for a story, which is always such a thrill. It's always a
Well,
privilege
that's
to
because
find
you've worked
yourself.
hard at it for years. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's it. And so I'm not doing so much of the sort of um, cold submission stuff, as it were, as I used to. But to be honest, if I was still doing that, I would still go about it the same way. So I'm thinking probably that my advice would be the same. And a lot of it's about general writing advice. I still teach short story writing clinics from time to time when I do workshops, and a lot of that is based around the art form of the short story, which is so similar to a novel in as much as it's beginning, middle, end. You need character development, you need conflict, blah, blah, blah. But the short story is a very tightly focused lens, whereas the novel has got a much wider view and it has subplots and whatnot. Um, and so a lot of that sort of advice of writing stories that sell is based around how to write a good short story, and then following guidelines and submission processes and doing the right thing to give yourself the best shot and all that sort of thing. And all that's kind of fairly timeless advice, really.
If, well, I was going to say, if no one's read you, should they start with shadow bites? But again, it depends on what kind of mood they're in. But just briefly talk about shadow bites, what that is.
So yeah, so that's basically it's like an Alan Baxter sampler, if you like. Somebody gave me the idea to do it where it's something you can give away. And I have to keep double checking because it's supposed to be free, but every once in
It's
a while
it
Amazon put it
it's
back up to 99 cents. Have they done that
yeah, it's
again?
showing as free on Kindle. Yeah.
Oh, it is still free. Good.
No,
So
on Amazon in the US anyway.
yeah, good. So it's supposed to be free. And normally Amazon will price match. So if you put it for free on places like, Barnes and Noble or Google Play or whatever, then
Right.
Amazon price match it, and that's how it goes free. But the idea is that it's if because given that I have a fair amount of work out there, and it's like, well, maybe people would need to get an idea of my style and my vibe. And so Shadow Bites is basically a free ebook. It has the first novella from the Tales of the Gulp in its entirety. It has, I think, two or three other complete short stories, and then it has the opening chapters, like the first three chapters or something from about six of my novels. And so it's something you can just go and find it on Amazon or any other ebook retailer, or on my website. You can find it and download it directly from my website too if you want to. Um, and it gives you that cross section, so it gives you the entire first story of the Tales and the Gulp. And so like if you like that, then you're going to probably enjoy the Gulp and the Fall. The other
Right.
short stories give you a sort of vibe of the sort of thing I do, and if you like those, you'll probably enjoy my short story collections. If you enjoy the opening chapters of the excerpts that are in there from the novels, then you can grab the rest of the novel, kind of thing. So
Right.
yeah, this was the idea, and it's basically, you want to give people talk about that sort of three stages of buying a book in the old fashioned way when you would go into bookstores. And so the first thing is they would see the cover and they go, oh, that's interesting. They would pick it up and look at the cover. Then they would turn it over and they would read the blurb on the back. If the blurb on the back sort of appealed to them, they would crack it open and they would leaf through and they would read a couple of pages. And a lot of booksellers would tell you, if people got to that stage, that third point where they were open it and looking at the pages, they would almost certainly buy it. And so it's like
The
the
odds are
cover and the
good.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the cover and the back cover copy really do sell books in that sort of physical space. And we still have that to some degree online, where people will see a cover and they'll read a description, but without that sort of tactile, that vibe of picking it up and looking at it and stuff, it's not the same. People skim through a lot, so you kind of need to give a little bit more than that. And so that's the idea of a sampler like this, is that it's something someone can grab and just read on their phone or on their Kindle or whatever, and go, oh, okay, they get a full sort of bite, they get a full meal out of me basically, and it's like, well, if they enjoy it, they'll come back to the restaurant for more. So
Oh no, I agree. It's a really great thing to do from a marketing standpoint, and y- you know we're all marketing something or other.
yeah, you've
Yeah.
got to, it's a case of it's so difficult to get heard, and what we all really want is a big readership so that we can continue to do what we do and hopefully at some point make half decent living at it, but mainly have an engaged readership that are interested in reading what you want to do. And getting noticed is so difficult these days, and the best advertising that you've got as a writer is your writing. Hopefully your stories, your books, the content of those stories sells themselves. People want to enjoy those stories. And it's like, how do you get people to, in the sea of noise, how do you get people to take a shot and see it? Once they've read a story or two, either they'll be like, oh, this guy's shit, I don't like it, they're not interested, or they've taken that bite and gone, wow, that was good and I want more. And so it's always that marketing, they say the best marketing is to write your next book. That's true. If you've got a lot of stuff out there, people are more inclined to go, oh, this guy's written a bunch of stuff. If I enjoy this, there's a bunch more.
Right.
But equally, how do you get them to sort of take that chance in the first place, and giving them something complete for free, like a few complete stories, a few chapters, all of that for free. Here you go, have a taste, see what you think. Hopefully, then the stories sell themselves.
There are writers that have said, never give anything away for free. You're better than that. Your work is worth more than that. I don't disagree with that at all. As far as the concept of it, whether it's whatever kind of art it is, or
Mm,
maybe it's podcasting, but maybe it's writing books or short stories or novellas. But on the other hand, having studied marketing for so long, and on my previous career was, I had to be good at it. I didn't want to be good at being a salesman, but I did want to be good at marketing.
yeah.
If you understand my point with the difference there. So,
Definitely.
am I disagreeing when they say that? Not really, but when you do give something away for free like this, you are in many ways you're doing yourself a favor, because if they like it, they are going to buy more.
Yeah.
You know,
And the other side of it is, it is giving something away for free, but equally the short stories in there already sold.
yes,
Um,
true.
I've been paid for them. The first story from the Gulp is in there, but that book sells, and this is just the first short story or the first novella from that book. And so if people want more, then they'll go and hopefully buy the gulp to read the rest of them. All the excerpts from the novels are not complete, so I'm giving them away. But if they want the whole story, they're going to go and need
Right.
to get the
Well,
novel.
let me
So
hasten to say for anyone out there, yeah, what they're probably talking about in mostly is, a publisher wanting to publish a short story, and you'll get paid, and I can't pay you, but a lot of people will
mm,
read it and it's good
yeah,
marketing for you. Don't do it.
no,
You know,
because nobody reads that.
right,
Um, it's like the only if you give away a story for free, the only people who might read the story are the other people who also gave them a story for that particular issue or that particular book, and maybe a few members of their family. It's very rare that you get exposure, but it's very rare that if you give something away for free that it gets exposed. Um, Equally, being paid for something or the value of something is not always monetary. Like if there's value, if
yeah,
you
you took the words
recognize
right out of my
value in
mouth.
giving it away, um, like it's very unlikely that you're going to build a big audience by giving stories away for free to, not being paid for them. But equally, if you can see some value in not getting paid for it, but giving your story to this thing because of some other intangible value, then go for it. Your value is based on what you feel like
Right.
the benefit is going to be, and it might not be getting paid, but and it's unlikely to be exposure, but there is, potentially lots of other reasons. And these days, I won't. Oh, I will very rarely give a story away. I have, even if someone says, "Oh, look, we can only pay token amount of, X dollars," and it's like, sorry, my work's worth more than
Yeah,
that these days.
absolutely.
Even to the point whereas I would actually make more by giving this free to my patrons because they pay me money every month, and so 1 month of Patreon subscriptions is going to be 10 times what you're offering me for this story. I'd rather give it to them. Um, but equally, if you can perceive value in giving something away and you can see some benefit for you and not just for them to have free work, then by all means, you don't have to be paid for it. But there
No,
needs to be value.
yeah, there does. And if you give something away for free, the short version of what you've been saying is, what real value are you getting, and not
Yeah.
just some value that someone's trying to sell you on.
Yeah.
It's why a lot of times you'll see new series these days where they'll offer the first episode free on
Mm,
streaming.
mm.
Are they giving something away for free? Well, hell yes, they are. But you watch that first episode and you're hooked, and then you're subscribing to that
Yeah.
streaming platform to watch the rest of it.
And a lot of indie authors who produce series, because a lot of the time for people who are independent and self-publishing, a lot of people say if you want to be a success, really focused on that, you need to write short books, you need to write series and blah, 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 because, you hook readers into an ongoing thing. And a lot of those people will always what they call perma-free. They'll have book one of a series is perma-free, always
Sure.
free. And that's the idea again, that everybody's getting book one, and for every 10 people who read it, if one person goes, oh, that's quite good, I'm going to get the next one, that's
Yeah.
value.
Yeah. So writers, yes, don't absolutely, the advice is good. Don't your work is worth more than that. Don't give it away for free. But as Alan said, if there's a value besides money that you can see that you're really, really getting,
Mm.
then do it. And this applies
there
to
there are
other
no
fields as
absolutes
well.
in this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, there are no absolutes in this gig. There's a bunch of things that are really good advice, but when it comes down to it, whatever's working for you and whatever's moving you towards your goals is good. So yeah,
I
whatever
would
those
also
goals
add
may be.
one more thing. When in general, I'm not talking about the first one free like we've been talking about, but in general, there's more of a value perceived in a work of art, be it a book or a painting or a sculpture or whatever. There's more of value perceived when a person has to pay for it. You
Mm.
know, the old joke about an art gallery where this painting's been sitting here for 6 months. I can't get it sold. Okay, let's raise it up $500, and then it sells.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
sort of thing.
That's standard real estate as well. If you're
Hmm.
trying to sell a house and you've got it in a price bracket and it's not selling, the first thing you do is put it up a price bracket, not down.
Yeah.
more often than all of a sudden it sells because you hit a bunch of people who are looking at a different price bracket and they go, oh, actually, I like that. So yeah,
And you can
perceived
honestly
value and all
say
that.
new price.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot
Now
better
offered,
than price reduced
yeah,
signs.
offered at this price for the first time ever.
Yeah. In real estate, I never did price reduced signs because it's basically saying nobody wants this. Will you please come see it?
Yeah.
So yeah. Uh, well, thanks, Alan. Really appreciate it. Is there something that
No
you'd like to
worries.
talk about that I maybe forgot to ask?
No, I don't think so. We've covered a lot. One thing I will say,
Hmm.
because people looking at that graphic, just hopefully in the short term, my novel Devouring Dark, the three Eli Carver novellas, and my collection Served Cold, those books are currently out of print. We're looking for a new home for those at the moment. My agent's on the case
Okay,
with that. They were
that's
with
good to
Grey
know.
Matter Press, but those are currently pulled from sale. If anybody wants ebooks, copies of those, they can buy them directly from me in the short term, no problem. But we're looking for new homes for those at this point, and still trying to decide what to do with those. So if you have trouble finding anything like that, you can always just message me through my website and we can see what we can figure out. But otherwise, hopefully, there's plenty of other stuff there to keep
Yeah,
people engaged. But
that's good to know, though. I think
yeah,
um, I want to keep this brief, but maybe we should finish up with something else that's on the mind of a lot of people, especially creative people.
mm,
And you and I have talked a little bit about it off and on, and that's social media, and
yeah,
the part that it plays in your writing and so forth. And where is it valuable? Where is it not? Um,
it's a necessary evil.
yeah,
Um, Yeah, it's an interesting time in social media. One of the
sure
reasons I've
is.
always worked really hard, and I'm very fortunate that I've got a good friend who really helps me out with the website stuff, because I've always maintained that as a writer, you absolutely need your own website, and it can be a free one, and it doesn't have to be much. You need a page that's a bio about you. You need a page that lists what books you've got, and you need a page that has contact information. I've had spoken to editors before who were like, really wanted to buy this story off so and so, but I just couldn't find a way to reach
Yeah,
them. And it's like, well, that's just crazy. Um, so first and foremost, I think it's really important that you have your own web presence that's not subject to man baby billionaires turning it into a shit fire and anything else. Um, but and for as a good example of that, for 14, 15 years or something, I was on Twitter. It was by far my social media of choice. I loved the way it worked. I loved the interaction. I built a big following of, I think, nearly 18,000 people or something on there. I had a really engaged Twitter. And then I said some mean things about rich people and I got my account permanently suspended. So
yeah,
that, boom, that's gone. I don't have Twitter anymore. It just got, and I was really struggling with the ethics of staying on that platform anyway, because it was just turning to shit so rapidly. But last year the decision got taken away from me. But it's also a perfect example of how you can have an avenue for interaction and engagement just gone. That
yes.
it can just happen. So I think it's really important that people have a website of their own, even if it is a free site, just so that that permanent online space is
If I can
always
add to
there.
that, the Lovecraft Easing website, before we get off of websites and onto other social media and media, um, I've had it up for years, and it's always been uh, people can always sign up for updates. They don't have to. They can
Mhm.
visit the site and never come back, but they can sign up for updates, and it puts them on an email list. So
Yeah.
over the years, I've got quite a large email list. You know, Elon
Mm,
Musk can't take that away from me.
that's right.
Nobody else can.
And that was exactly going to be my
Yeah.
second point,
Okay.
because that's so having a website is really important, and building an email list is also really important. And I've been working extra hard on that. And just another example, I Substack was a fantastic platform the way it's all built, and they've just got a real fucking Nazi problem as well now. And I started building there, and I've since pulled out and deleted my Substack. But I've maintained my email list throughout all of that. You can export it. So now I self-host my newsletter through my website on using a WordPress plugin.
Yeah.
but that becomes
WordPress is nice. I like WordPress.
yeah,
I've used it the whole time.
yeah, me too. And like I said, I've got this friend of mine who's really sort of helpful and supportive, helps me with the more complicated parts of it. But I did the newsletter plugin myself, and it was smooth, no problem. And the beauty of that is that people who sign up for it, you're not just yelling into the void of social media, but they've gone to the point to say, "Oh, here's my email address. I want to hear from you."
Right.
So 1,000 people on an email list is worth 10,000 people following you on social media because
They actually
they
asked for it.
they actually want to know. Yeah. And so I've been really working hard on building my newsletter, and I've always maintained a website because otherwise social media is so ephemeral. And then the
If
third
I
thing
can
I've
add to
been
the, if you don't mind, if I can add to
mm,
the newsletter thing, for those of you who work hard on building one up, just I would say don't overuse it.
mm,
You know, you don't need to send them an email every day. They don't want to hear from you every day because they're going to unsubscribe.
yeah.
You
I
know,
tend to do about once a month or so. If there's particular news or time sensitive thing, I'll send an extra one, but otherwise I tend to write not too long but fairly lengthy covering stuff that's going on about once a month or so.
yeah. The thing is, there's no set rule. You
Mm,
know, it depends on the person. It depends on the website. But just whatever you do, don't overdo it with the mine. Every time I post on the website, it automatically sends out to everyone who's requested it over the years saying, hey, here's a new post, go and read it if you want. But sometimes a week or two will go by before I post, and sometimes there's 2 in a week, but I try not to ever do more than that. So
mm.
just
And
very
and
loose rule, folks.
that's the right thing to do. I mean, yeah, the bottom line is, as you said, just don't overuse it. Figure out what sort of
Yeah.
engagement level people getting your email want. Yeah. And the third thing that I've been really focusing on subsequently in recent couple of years is the Patreon that I mentioned before. Because again, it's a very small number of people. I mean, my Patreon's fucking tiny, but those are people who are genuinely engaged and want to know what's going on, and you can reach them directly and they can get back to you directly, and it gives you so that's all other social media kind of orbits that for me, because
I'll
it
tell you
keeps
what, if
changing
someone
so
had
much.
asked me these questions and interviewed me about this, I would have said pretty much everything you just said. I 100%
Mm,
agree with what you're saying.
that's good to know.
Well, I've
um
studied a long time, but I never say I'm an expert. I just say I'm
yeah,
I'm a
that's the thing.
lifelong student of marketing because it
Yeah,
changes.
same. That's it, same. And I'm always trying to figure out, you know the thing
The
the
other
thing
thing
about
about
this.
Patreon, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was
Oh,
just going to say the thing about this is the more, in some ways, the more successful you get, the less time you have for what made you successful. So the more
good
books you
point.
put out, the more engagements you get, and whatever else. It's like I used to have plenty of writing time because I wasn't doing anything else. But I have readers now. I have a certain fan base. I have a certain commitment to things. I get invited to things, and all of which is brilliant. But equally, it reduces the amount of time I can actually just sit here and work.
Right.
So it's become very important to me to really sort of streamline how much of my time and effort I put into things that take me away from writing, and how much feedback I get from that. And so that's why those things have become an important focus for me, because I've learned that that's where my time and energy is most well spent.
The Back to the Patreon thing, um, folks. If you have a Patreon, I didn't start. I didn't think we were going to be talking about things like this, but it just occurred to me that you and I have talked about this, and so I know it's
Mm,
valuable to my listeners, whatever they're doing. About the So with that said, about the Patreon thing, yes, you have patrons who pay, whether it's $1 a month, $5 a month, whatever it is, $50 a month, if you're lucky. The the uh, the thing about it though is you can now have free
mm,
patrons where that's basically a newsletter that they've signed up for, in other words. And you can, when you post, you can say, do you send this to everybody, or do you want to, is this kind of an announcement? You want to send it to your free um, Patreons, And do you want to send it to the paid ones, one or the other? You know, so it's
I
really
do that
nice that
every
they've
time I
done that.
send.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. It's good, and I do that now. Every time I send a newsletter out, I copy and paste the newsletter as a blog post on my website so that it's just there to be found because I don't blog much otherwise. And I copy and paste it to Patreon as a public post,
yeah,
so that those are the three places. So I send a newsletter out and I put it on my website and I put it on Patreon as well. And that way people, all those people across that sort of initial level of people who are solidly engaged and actually keen to know what I'm up to, it's like, well, they're going to see it. Social media after that, I'm finding Blue Sky to be really good. I'm really enjoying Blue Sky. And hopefully that will grow a bit. And it is very similar to what Twitter used to be. Threads, I'm on there, but I'm, I, it's bad. The algorithm is bad for me on that, and I keep seeing, it's difficult to engage on that because you see a lot of shit you don't want to see, or you don't see stuff
yeah.
that you do want to see, or whatever
I
else.
tried it and I was like, I can't even see the people I'm following. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it
Threads,
was a really
Threads is a
missed
bit of a mess.
opportunity for them. Not that he's going to fill it in his wallet, Zuckerberg, but it was really
Yeah,
missed opportunity because they had so many signups right away. They should have had it done right from the start, and then they would have kept those people.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It was a bit of a mess. Some people are really enjoying it, and that's great. But for me, it was a real mess. I'm finding a lot more. I'm enjoying Blue Sky a lot more. Um, Other than that, I've always had Instagram mainly because it's sort of image based and a lot. I mean, half the people who follow me are following me for my dogs more than anything else. So you want to
right.
see cute pictures of my dogs? That's mostly Instagram. So that tend, and I also have a TikTok account, and I tried that for a while, but it's really not. I'm not great at remembering or coming up with things to do for these short videos. I really enjoy TikTok. I really enjoy watching it. There's a lot of mad talented people on there, and there's some really good book talk reviewers on there that I really enjoy sort
Yeah,
of
I'm one of those.
watching them and hearing. Yeah, yeah, I really enjoy finding out what people are reading, and that it's a really great platform for that. But I found it's not one that I actually contribute to very much. So for me, it's kind of like it's website, newsletter, Patreon is the core. Around that, I still have Facebook because I hate it, but it's kind of an inevitability. I have Facebook and Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram, little bits and pieces here and there just to sort of stay engaged.
Well,
Um, but I tend to be posting and doing a bit less these days, mainly because that sort of whole vibe of social media is changing a little bit. I tend to hang out on Blue Sky and just talk shit and chat and have fun there because, that's the thing on the phone and it's kind of easy and fun. And I enjoy that in a similar way that I used to enjoy hanging out on Twitter for the same sort of reasons.
right.
But
Well,
otherwise, yeah.
I'd like to recap this and disagree or whatever at any point. But well, first of all, I'm sure you agree that there are no real rules. Do
Hmm.
what's best for you. Maybe Instagram is the thing for you. Maybe it's
Social media,
TikTok.
sorry to interrupt, but
No,
social
go ahead.
media, I think the most important thing about any form of social media is that you use the ones you enjoy using so
Yeah.
that you are genuine and authentic when you're there, and don't force yourself to use social medias that you just don't like. Fuck them, you can do without them, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you really can. And I'll be honest, Alan, there are days that go by that I don't check social media. Plenty of
Mm,
days.
mm,
It's just, in fact, Pete called me last night about something going on Facebook. Uh, and he's like, I think you're friends with this guy, and I know you don't check, Facebook friends. I didn't even know who the idiot was.
mm.
And he goes, you might want to unfriend him.
I know who
And
you're talking about.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, thanks, man. He goes, because I know you don't look at your Facebook too often. I'm like, no, I don't.
Yeah,
Okay, but to recap everything, let's do this. First of all, a website is crucial.
yeah,
And along with that, people should be able to sign up for your mailing list.
yeah.
I'm using WordPress for years,
Same,
but
same.
with the new fiction podcast, the Weird Library that I'm doing, I'm using MailChimp,
Hmm.
and I've also got a Facebook group. But like you said, people that have signed up for an email when there's a new episode of the Weird Library, they've already raised their hand. You know,
Mm.
so it's a good thing. So let's recap the whatever you're doing, podcast writing, whatever, website, a mailing list, email mailing list, a and Patreon is a good thing if you can do it, if that's your sort of thing, if you have the time for it. But I do think it's a
Yeah.
I really like Patreon. Now, let me throw a
Yeah.
few things out there in addition to these three. My son tells me I need to get on Ko-Fi, and as far as people leaving tips for you, or if they don't like Patreon, that sort of thing. And I tend to listen to what he has to say, so I'm gonna try
I
that.
have that as, yeah, I have
Yeah,
that as well. You can use it like Patreon with tiers and, and subscriptions and everything like that, which I
right,
tried at first, but it really wasn't working. And I ended up moving to Patreon because
right,
people are familiar with that for that sort of model. But
right.
I still have Ko-fi as available because if people just want to say, love what you're doing, bang, and throw
Yeah,
you a tip, it's basic. I use it basically as a tip jar. And sometimes it's amazing to me. Like I had a bit of a rough trot a year or two ago where I suddenly got hit with all these bills and then my car blew its battery and I was just lamenting on social media going, fucking hell, I could use a break. And next thing I know, a bunch of people were like, "Hey, I'm in a position to help out," and they dropped me some cash through Kofi, and it fucking saved my bacon at that particular time. It
yeah.
was a real dodgy
Uh,
period
I'm
of a
I'm
couple of months,
I'm not
and
proud
so
with health problems with my son and me. I've had to raise my hand up a couple of times over the
yeah,
last
yeah, I
13
remember
years,
that.
and I'm amazed at the generosity of the people in our community.
Yeah, it is incredible. It is amazing. And for me, Kofi is by far Kofi. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. They're by far the most valuable in terms of that because it's set, it's right there. They can click it for a small amount. They can change it
Yeah,
up or whatever. It's just bang, done and dusted. There's
and it
no
is
other.
always an easier decision to make to give to somebody once than to commit
Yeah,
to,
exactly.
you
There's
know,
no commitment. They don't
yeah.
sign up for anything.
Even if
They can
it's a
just go
dollar a
here.
month, it's a decision.
Yeah,
Whereas you
exactly.
give somebody $20 on Ko-Fi or Kofi or whatever, you're
Mm.
like, I wanted to do this, don't need to think about it, decision over,
Yeah,
you know.
that's it. And it's right there. And so it's yeah, I have that for exactly that reason.
Let me say this about Patreon. I've had it about 6 years now. When I started, I knew I had a lot of followers, and but it was a slow start on Patreon until
Mm.
someone
It
pointed
is a
out to
very
me.
slow build.
Yeah, until someone pointed out to me, as I said, student of marketing, not an expert. A friend pointed out to me that it is a commitment. It's a monthly commitment on people's parts, so it's going to build more slowly. So
Mm.
if you start a Patreon, don't be discouraged. Keep giving value to the Patreons you have, even if there's only three of them. Do it, and it'll
Mm-hmm.
grow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for my part, I do talk on camera a lot. That's what we're doing right now, right? So I never would have thought TikTok would be a platform for me. It's just not, doesn't seem like me. But then,
Mm.
but then I thought, yeah, wait a minute, you're already yakking on camera anyway. Why don't you do just short 30 to 60 second? I like this book, so I've been doing that. It's TikTok.
Yeah, I've seen them. They're good. I like
Yeah.
it. I
Oh,
like to
thank
see
you.
it when you come up on there. It's good.
Yeah. And uh, I, I've had a lot of views and I'm happy about that. So, it
Mm.
just depends on what kind of person you are.
Mm.
And the thing about the others, Twitter, Facebook, um, Substack, um, Blue Sky. I think Blue Sky is neat, but right now there's crickets. You
Mm.
know,
Took me a long time to build an engagement on there, but
yeah.
it turned out to be worth it. Like I've sort of managed once I managed to sort of track down some people, followed a lot of people, started replying, engaging a bit, and then that feedback started to wrap around. And then it came good. But I mean, I
Well,
remember it was the same with
again,
Twitter in the day. So
and it's probably my fault because I'm not going on there and engaging so much. And so I haven't left it, but I just said, hey, I'll be back. I don't really have
mm.
time for this right now. Another component is, uh, you know, I'm I love simplicity.
Mm.
Um, I'm a lifelong student of Taoism, simplicity, and I don't personally want 25 different social media
Yeah, I
accounts.
know.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. I tried everything and I really streamlined it back.
Yeah, exactly. So
Other
for
than
me,
the sort of core three we talked about, like the
yeah,
website, Patreon, and the newsletter, I've pretty much pared back pretty much just to Blue Sky and Instagram with any regularity now. I check in
Yeah.
on Facebook once in a while or Threads once in a while, but that's all. And I've just let everything else go because I don't want to have the
Right.
mental labor of trying to think about those things and commit or remember or whatever else. I've got a little subfolder on my phone with all those apps all in a different subfolder, and
That's
every once in a
smart.
while I'll be like, yeah, every once in a while I'll be like, oh, and I'll go and have a, if I've got, I'm sitting waiting for something or whatever, I'll go and have a look and I'll have a quick look through if there's any particular messages, notifications that have come through there. But otherwise, I don't. Otherwise, the only ones that are on my phone or anywhere for sort of the quick access is Instagram and Blue Sky, and Facebook. But
I've got a friend, I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, who's got quite a large following on Twitter, and he can post a picture of his dog or say something about his dog, and he's going to have, a million people saying something, well, not a million, but, plenty of people saying something
yeah,
about it. Whereas another person, they don't have that following. It just depends.
Hmm.
I talked to someone who actually did some Twitter learning. I don't know what they took a
like,
class on it basically, and then
yeah,
I
I see.
kind of took a class from him online because he's a friend. He said, this is this. And one of the main things he said is if you don't have a blue check mark, then you're on Twitter these days. Then Elon Musk is. You basically
Yeah,
are. Um,
it's getting
you're
suppressed.
shooting yourself in the foot. The blue
Yeah,
checks.
you
Yeah.
either pay Elon and you join that fucking crew of just
Right.
fundamentally neo-Nazis and fuckwits that are all just pandering at the feet of Elon,
Right.
or you don't. But then your everything you post just gets actively suppressed, and everything with a blue check goes above you, and so it's just
That's absolutely right.
it's
So
a
what I
bin
did
fire. It's
was,
a wasteland.
yeah, I had two Twitter accounts, a personal account and just a Lovecraft Easing account, and I terminated my personal account, and I've still got the Lovecraft Easing Twitter account. I don't get a lot. I'm still still trying to decide if that's even worth it or not. But
Yeah.
I will say this: I I would not advise personally, paying for that blue check and getting the traffic. I mean, to me, it's not worth selling my soul to get some more uh, follow-ups on. I mean, to get some
No.
more followers on Twitter.
And the most people you pay for the check, you get the thing. The most people who then see it, you get a lot more people will see it, but the people who see it are the other people who've played for a blue check. So
Right,
it's this kind, they're always going about, oh, your echo chamber and blah blah. It's like, guys, you're just
right.
creating your own. Yeah, and it's just, yeah. If I hadn't have got kicked off Twitter in the middle of last year, it is absolute. I was already planning to quit. I would have been long gone by now.
Yeah,
Yeah, the juice ain't worth the squeeze with that place anymore, which is a real shame. I'm fucking salty about it because until Musk bought it, it had lots of problems, but it was a genuinely powerful
right.
force in social media. It was a genuinely enjoyable
Not only
place
that,
to
but it was
engage.
important. It was important for all of us, the public,
Mm.
to
It
go
was
to.
emergency response. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
everything, man. It
And
was,
he
yeah,
really has killed that. And that's
he
a
fucked it.
valuable service.
Mm.
That's
Yeah,
just,
it's a shame. It's a shame. It's been completely ruined. But
yeah.
the world moves on. This is the thing. Just takes us back to the first point. Make sure you got something that's your own to hang on to. You always have your own hub somewhere, being
Uh,
a website.
I am on Facebook. I do, when I'm on there, I do enjoy, you know, seeing my friends because my friends are at the very top of my feed. I've got thousands of quote unquote friends,
Same, yeah.
but I favorited all, Pete Rollick on, all the people I'm close to, and they
Mm-hmm.
come up first. So, you know, it it's a good sensation. It's fun. And I'm not
Yeah.
much of a scroller, so I see them right away. The the page has always done really well for me, the Facebook page. Got a lot of followers on that, got the Facebook group. I guess my point in all this is that it just depends, but I totally agree with you about the big three.
Mm.
Absolutely. And the rest.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
yeah. Otherwise, where you commit and engage is probably where you're going to build the best
Yeah.
following and reciprocal engagement. You can't do that
Yeah.
everywhere. So pick somewhere that you like, pick somewhere you're comfortable, focus on it.
Right. Well, thanks for the advice. I'm sure a lot of listeners will appreciate it.
I hope it works out. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be what works for me.
Yeah. And thanks for talking with me, man.
No, always a pleasure. It's always good to
Yeah.
hang out, man.
So I'm in Texas. It's 6:05 p.m. We're recording this on the 27th of January for those of you who are wondering later. I'll probably
It's
post
11
this.
a.m. on the 28th of January for me.
Yeah. How is tomorrow?
It's fine. It's fine. So far, it's a pleasant day.
That's good. I was
Yeah.
wondering. Yeah, I'll probably post this mid next week. But so it's
Cool.
6:05 here. And what time did you say it was there?
Just gone 11:05
Okay.
a.m.
We've been talking a while. So
Yeah, we have actually. Yeah,
yeah.
that's cool. Like
Well,
I said,
thanks,
always
Alan.
nice to hang out.
Yeah.
No worries.
Well, remember, folks, go to Alan's website. He really, I really do admire how you have all your books organized. It's very valuable for the potential readers. Go there, alanbaxter.com .au. Do I have that right?
That's it. That's it.
And I'll have the link in the show notes. As I said, if you're interested, hey, sign up for his email list and take a look at his Patreon. So
Absolutely. Always good to hear from people and chat and
yeah.
catch up
And
what's
thank
going
you
on.
for being a patron.
Yeah,
So
likewise. No worries. No worries.
yeah, I think I'm not. I think we're both canceling each other out with our Patreon donations, but I'm just like, I want to support them. So
yeah, likewise. So I think it works a little bit like that, but the net result is
right.
some places it's reciprocal and that allows you to do other things and that feeds out and it becomes this kind of fractal presence that you have where you can support the people that you want to support and you can feel supported and
Right.
it works.
Yeah, I think I'm doing the same thing with a couple other people. Jeff Thomas is one of them, I think. So where we're canceling each other out, but
But the other side of that as
yeah.
well, it's I mean it's a bit sort of cold in some ways, but there is a perceived sort of social capital to these things. And if someone's got 3 patrons, other people come along and go, oh God, what's the point in joining that? Someone's got 30 patrons, they come along and
It's
go, oh,
very
okay,
true.
I'll jump in. I'll be part of that community.
It's very
So
true.
it does actually there is genuine value in showing your support for things. It's that whole principle of, when you believe in something, stand up for it and you give someone else a place to stand.
Right. Plus we hear from the person as well with their projects and so forth. And we have access to the benefits that you have access to my benefits at your level. I have access to your benefits at the level I'm giving at. So that there's that too. So it's not really canceling each other out. It's a good thing to do.
No, it's not. No, it's mutually supportive and it helps to build the support out from that to the wider world.
Last thing I would say about all this is if you're not enjoying it, if you're not having fun most of the time, maybe rethink things.
Yeah, find something else. Do what you enjoy doing. You'll be genuine and authentic and you'll engage more if you actually genuinely enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. And
thank you.
Talk soon. Thanks everybody for listening and or watching. And we will see you next time.